When someone comes at you, the first instinct is to fight back, to explain, to defend. But here's the thing, every time you defend yourself, you're putting the other person in control. You're handing over your peace, your energy, and your focus. What if instead of defending, you chose to stand firm, calm, and confident? Because the truth is, you don't need to convince anyone of your worth. When someone points a finger at you or throws words that sting, the natural pull inside is to jump in, explain yourself, prove your side, or defend your actions. That instinct comes from wanting to correct the story in their head because it feels like if you don't speak up, then what they believe about you will stick. But here's the trap. Defending yourself doesn't stop the story, it fuels it. The moment you start explaining or justifying, you've stepped onto their playing field and they control the rules. What was just an accusation or a comment suddenly becomes a full-on back-and-forth battle, and instead of protecting yourself, you've put yourself in a position where they now expect you to prove something. Think about it. If someone says, "You're always late," and you fire back with, "No, I was only late twice this week because of traffic," what just happened? The original claim wasn't about facts, it was about feeling. And now, by defending, you've turned a statement into a debate. You're not correcting the story, you're giving it life. Defending creates a fight because it shifts the conversation into proving who's right. And once you're there, it's no longer about peace, it's about winning. That means you've gone from being grounded to being dragged into the arena, and arenas are loud, messy, and designed for conflict. The harder part to accept is that some people don't actually want your defense. They want your reaction. They want the energy you give when you get flustered, when your voice rises, when you scramble for proof. Defending yourself hands them exactly what they were looking for, your energy, your focus, your attention. And the more you give, the more they push. It's like adding wood to a fire and wondering why it keeps getting hotter. You think you're putting out the flames by explaining, but really, you're the one keeping the blaze alive. That's why defending never ends in peace. It ends in exhaustion. There's also a power shift that happens when you defend. You're saying, without saying it, "Your opinion of me matters more than my own," because if it didn't matter, you wouldn't feel the urge to explain. Defending makes it look like their words have authority over your worth. And once you play into that, you've already lost ground. The stronger move is to let their words hang in the air without grabbing them, without wrestling them, without feeding them. A calm response like, "I hear you," or even no response at all, leaves the power where it belongs, with you. They can throw all they want, but you don't have to catch it. And here's the truth. People will think what they want to think. You can explain until you're blue in the face, and if they're committed to their story, your words won't change it. So defending doesn't create clarity, it creates conflict. It's not about convincing them, it's about controlling yourself. Because the more you defend, the more you fight, and the more you fight, the less peace you have. The real strength is not in the volume of your defense, but in the calmness of your restraint. Confidence is something people can sense before you even open your mouth. It's in the way you carry yourself, the calmness in your tone, and the steadiness in your eyes. When you defend yourself, what you're really doing is showing that someone's words shook you, that their opinion hit a nerve. But confidence doesn't need to rush in with explanations or justifications because it doesn't see words as threats. Confidence knows that truth doesn't need an argument to stand. It already stands on its own. When you choose not to defend, you're sending a stronger message than any string of words could carry. You're unshaken, you're secure, and you don't need approval to validate who you are. People often believe that the louder they speak, the more persuasive they'll be, but real persuasion comes from calm presence. You've probably seen it before, someone hurling accusations, trying to provoke a reaction, while the other person stays composed, maybe even quiet. Who looks stronger in that moment? The one who stays calm. Confidence doesn't need to fill silence because it knows silence can speak louder than words. Defending yourself can sound like scrambling, like trying to prove you belong at the table, but confidence doesn't ask for a seat, it sits down knowing it belongs. That quiet assurance is what people respect more than 1,000 defensive explanations. When you defend, you're often reacting from fear, Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being disliked, fear of being wrong. Confidence doesn't ignore those fears, it just refuses to be led by them. Instead of explaining, confidence chooses clarity in action. It might be as simple as saying, "That's not accurate," and moving on. Short, firm, and done. The difference is that defending tries to win someone over, while confidence shows that winning them over isn't even necessary. Confidence is rooted in self-trust, in knowing that your value doesn't rise or fall based on what someone else says about you. It's also important to realize that explanations don't always land the way we hope. The more you try to defend, the more you can come across as guilty, even if you're not. It's like when someone says, "I didn't eat the last cookie," before anyone even asked who did. It sounds suspicious. Confidence avoids that trap. It doesn't over-explain, it doesn't overshare, and it doesn't overreact. Instead, it uses brevity and composure to carry weight. People are drawn to that because it signals strength, and strength doesn't beg to be seen, it just shows up. Confidence is contagious, and the more you practice not defending, the more you'll start to feel it. At first, it's uncomfortable because silence feels like surrender, but over time, you'll see that silence isn't surrender, it's control. It's the ability to let others speak their piece without needing to match their energy. Confidence knows that the truth always outlasts the noise, and it doesn't need to race to the front to be believed. The real voice of confidence is calm, measured, and steady, and it speaks volumes without ever rushing to defend. Silence has a weight to it that words can't always match. When someone expects you to jump in, defend yourself, or argue back, your silence can be disarming. It unsettles them because it breaks the pattern they were counting on. They wanted you to take the bait, to react, to get caught up in their energy, but instead you hold steady. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean surrender. It means you've chosen not to participate in the drama, and that choice is powerful because it shows that you're not controlled by the situation. You're controlling yourself. In a world where everyone rushes to speak, silence becomes a strength that stands out. The truth is, most people aren't listening to understand. They're listening to reply. That's why defending yourself rarely brings peace. When you stay silent, you're stepping out of that cycle. You're not feeding their need for conflict. Instead, you're creating space for the other person to hear their own words, maybe even realize how unreasonable they sound. Sometimes the greatest mirror you can hold up is your quiet. When there's nothing for them to push against, the momentum of their attack often slows down. Silence has a way of deflating arguments because it doesn't provide the oxygen they need to burn. But silence isn't just about withholding words, it's about controlling your emotions. It's easy to stay quiet on the outside while raging on the inside, but real strength comes when your inner state matches your outer calm. That's when silence becomes more than just a tactic, it becomes discipline. You're training yourself to resist the pull of impulsive reactions, to stand firm in your composure. People may mistake it for indifference, but it's not that. It's intentional restraint. It's choosing not to invest your energy where it won't make a difference. That's the kind of silence that speaks volumes because it carries dignity. Of course, silence can be uncomfortable, especially in heated moments. You might feel pressure to fill it, to explain, to prove yourself, but the discomfort isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're breaking old habits. Most of us were raised to think that defending ourselves is how we stand strong, but silence flips that script. It teaches that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to answer. The discipline of holding silence allows you to maintain control of the situation without escalating it, and in many cases, it makes the other person show more about themselves than you ever could with words. Silence also forces perspective. It gives you room to think instead of react, to choose your response instead of rushing into one. That pause is powerful because it shifts the conversation from impulse to intention. Instead of fueling chaos, silence invites clarity. It may not always change the other person, but it always changes your position in the moment. You move from being someone pulled into the storm to someone who stays anchored in the middle of it. And that's the kind of presence people notice. Not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who holds steady when everything around them is loud. Boundaries are the quiet lines that protect your peace without needing to be shouted about. They don't ask for permission and they don't require anyone else's approval to exist. When you set boundaries, you're not defending yourself, you're defining yourself. You're saying, this is where I end and you begin. Defending yourself gets caught up in proving who's right and who's wrong, but boundaries don't bother with that fight. They're not about winning arguments, they're about maintaining balance. And when you have clear boundaries, the need to defend yourself starts to fade because your limits speak louder than any defense ever could. The beauty of boundaries is that they remove you from battles you don't belong in. When someone tries to provoke or challenge you, your boundary is the shield that prevents their words from piercing your sense of self. You don't have to defend why you don't tolerate disrespect, why you don't accept certain behavior, or why you choose to walk away. The boundary itself is the answer. If someone doesn't like it, that's their struggle, not yours. Boundaries replace the exhausting cycle of constant explanation with a steady, consistent standard. They allow you to disengage without guilt, to step back without looking weak, and to protect your peace without giving anyone a courtroom trial of your choices. Boundaries also simplify communication. Instead of long, defensive speeches, you can state your limits clearly and firmly. I'm not going to continue this conversation if it turns disrespectful or I don't share personal details at work. No defense, no backstory, no need to justify, just clarity. That kind of directness commands respect because it shows you're not here to debate your worth, you're here to protect it. Defending yourself tries to convince the other person of your value. Boundaries already assume that value exists and it's not up for discussion. That shift in posture is what creates strength without the noise of self-defense. Of course, boundaries take practice because they often get tested. The moment you put one in place, someone will try to push against it to see if it holds. And when that happens, it's tempting to defend, I'm not trying to be rude, or I just need space because I'm busy. But explanations like that weaken the boundary. The strongest version is the simplest one. You don't owe a courtroom defense for your own limits. Holding the line consistently without over-explaining trains others to respect where you stand. It also reinforces to yourself that you're not responsible for managing their reactions. You're only responsible for honoring your boundary. What makes boundaries powerful is that they create freedom. They free you from feeling like you have to fight every battle, respond to every attack, or defend every choice. Instead, you stand firm in what you allow and what you don't. That steadiness builds trust with yourself because every time you honor a boundary, you prove to yourself that your peace matters more than approval. And once you know that, the pull to defend yourself loses its grip. You realize that you don't need to fight back, you just need to hold the line. Self-control is the quiet strength that keeps you steady when everything around you is trying to pull you off balance. When someone challenges you, criticizes you, or throws accusations your way, the easiest thing to do is to react. You want to fire back, to prove them wrong, to set the record straight. But that reaction isn't control. That's giving your emotions the driver's seat. Defending yourself often feels like the right move in the moment, but what it really does is hand over your power. Self-control works differently. It says, I don't need to fight every battle because my peace is more valuable than your opinion. That choice isn't weakness, it's mastery. When you practice self-control, you begin to see the difference between responding and reacting. A reaction is quick, emotional, and usually defensive. A response is deliberate, measured, and rooted in clarity. Defending yourself almost always falls into the reaction category. It's fueled by the need to prove something fast. Self-control slows everything down. It creates space between what was said and how you choose to handle it. In that space, you find freedom. You're no longer a puppet to someone else's words. You're the one holding the strings. That discipline changes the entire dynamic because the person trying to provoke you loses their power the moment you refuse to hand over yours. There's also a deep confidence that grows out of self-control. The more you practice it, the more you realize that not everything deserves your energy. Not every comment requires a reply. Not every attack deserves an audience. Defending yourself drains you because it feels like you have to prove your worth over and over again. Self-control does the opposite. It conserves your energy by reminding you that your worth isn't up for debate in the first place. That's why people who seem calm under pressure command respect. It's not that they don't feel the sting of criticism, it's that they've trained themselves not to let that sting dictate their behavior. Self control also protects your reputation in ways defending yourself never could. When you jump into defense mode, emotions often take over. Words slip out that you can't take back, and suddenly the argument is about your reaction instead of the original issue. But when you hold steady, when you keep your composure, you leave a different impression. People remember how calm you were, how you didn't get rattled, how you stayed centered. That's the kind of strength that lasts longer than any defense. It shows maturity, restraint, and a deeper kind of confidence that words alone can't capture. And the truth is, self-control is harder than defending yourself. It takes more strength to stay calm than it does to lash out. It takes more discipline to bite your tongue than it does to argue. But that's why it's so powerful. Each time you choose self-control over defense, you're proving to yourself that you're in charge of your emotions, not the other way around. You're building resilience that doesn't just show up in arguments. It shows up in every area of life. That steady presence, that refusal to let others pull you off course becomes your greatest strength because it allows you to live from a place of peace instead of a place of constant battle.